The end of communism? Mikhail Gorbachev, the youngest member of the Soviet Politburo, was chosen to be the General Secretary of the Communist Party. He participated in 4 summit meetings with Reagan, and in 1987, initiated a program of reforms to bring democracy to their political process. The reforms were denounced by some Eastern Bloc countries and old-line communists. A decline in the economy, the worst since World War II, developed an atmosphere of unrest. This is the same Gorbachev, who made the following statement, which was printed by Pravda on December 11, 1984. In the struggle for peace and social progress, the Communist Party of the Soviet Union pursues a consistent policy of rallying the forces of the international communist and working-class movement in every possible way. We uphold the historical justness of the great ideas of Marxism-Leninism, and along with all the revolutionary and peace-loving forces of mankind, stand for social progress, and peace and security for all nations. This is what should determine the resolute nature of our propaganda. Gorbachev said in November, 1987, "In our work and worries, we are motivated by those Leninist ideals and noble endeavors and goals which mobilized the workers of Russia 7 decades ago to fight for the new and happy world of socialism. Perestroika, restructuring, is a continuation of the October Revolution." He also said, "Gentlemen, comrades, do not be concerned about all you hear about glasnost and perestroika and democracy in the coming years. These are primarily for outward consumption. There will be no significant internal change within the Soviet Union, other than for cosmetic purposes. Our purpose is to disarm the Americans and let them fall asleep." On another occasion he said, "We are moving toward a new world, the world of communism. We shall never turn off that road." In February, 1989, after a futile 8-year guerrilla war against government rebels in Afghanistan, the Soviets pulled their troops out of the country. The communist superpower had lost a lot of the prestige that years of propaganda had built up, and the embarrassing defeat signaled the beginning of the end. Gorbachev said, "We are not going to change Soviet power, of course, or abandon its fundamental principles, but we acknowledge the need for changes that will strengthen socialism." In October, 1989, Gorbachev said, "The concept, the main idea, lies in the fact that we want to give a new lease on life to socialism through perestroika and to reveal the potential of the socialist system." Also in 1989, he said, "Through perestroika we want to give socialism a second wind. To achieve this, the Communist Party of the Soviet Union returns to the origins and principles of the Bolshevik Revolution, to the Leninist ideas about the construction of a new society." He said in December, 1989, "Today we have perestroika, the salvation of socialism, giving it a second breath, revealing everything good which is in the system." He also said, "I am a communist, a convinced communist. For some that may be a fantasy, but for me, it is my main goal." In June, 1990, he said, "I am now, just as I've always been, a convinced communist. It's useless to deny the enormous and unique contribution of Marx, Engels and Lenin to the history of social thought and to modern civilization as a whole." On August 19, 1991, a report from Russia indicated that Gorbachev had become ill, and the vice president had taken over the country, imposing a state of emergency. In reality, the military, the KGB, and communist hardliners had initiated a coup to take over the government. Or at least that is what they wanted us to think. It is the belief of Donald S. McAlvany, who publishes the McAlvany Intelligence Advisor, that the coup was a hoax. He reported that all 8 coup leaders were Gorbachev appointees, and coup leader, Gennady Yanayev, referred to himself as the acting president, saying that Gorbachev would return to power after he recovered from his illness. In all past coups and revolutions, the KGB would have killed Gorbachev, and other reform leaders, but they weren't even arrested. Only a minimal amount of troops participated in the coup. The internal or international lines of communication were not cut, the press was not controlled, and the airports were not closed. A very strange coup indeed. Boris Yeltsin, the president of the Russian Republic, denounced the coup, and called for a show of force, which produced about 50,000 demonstrators at the Russian parliament. The picture of him on top of a Soviet tank, in open defiance of the communist hardliners, was an indelible image in the hearts of the Soviet people, and the world. This Russian John Wayne had joined the Communist Party in 1961, at the age of 30, and by December, 1985, had been appointed head of the 1.2 million member Moscow City Party Committee, the largest communist organization in the Soviet Union. However, he resigned from the Communist Party in July, 1990, and was now known as a non-communist reformer. By August 21, 1991, the coup had failed, and Gorbachev was restored as president. Of the 8 coup leaders, 1 was said to have committed suicide, and may have been murdered. The other 7 were tried and imprisoned. In the past, Such men would have just been shot, which gives credibility to the theory that the coup was a hoax. They were later released from prison. Shortly after the coup, the president of Soviet Georgia accused Gorbachev of masterminding the coup. Eduard Shevardnadze, Gorbachev's former foreign minister, even said that he may have been behind it. Private polls indicated that 62% of the Soviet people believed the coup to be staged. So what did the coup accomplish? In light of the sagging economy, the coup was to give Gorbachev the appearance of grabbing control back from the old guard communists, which would boost his popularity with the Soviet people, and make the West think that there was a potential for widespread democratic reforms in Russia. On August 24, Gorbachev resigned as the leader of the Communist Party, and recommended that its Central Committee be discontinued. On August 29, the Soviet Parliament voted to suspend all activities of the Communist Party. Political insiders believe that the Communist Party has not discontinued, but has undergone a massive restructuring to streamline it, which will be reborn with a new image and a new name, but with the same old goals. The Communist Party in Italy became known as the Democratic Party, in Poland, it became known as the Social Democratic Party, and in Romania, it was called the New Salvation Front. On September 2, Gorbachev announced that his country was on the brink of catastrophe, and that all authority was to be transferred to himself, the presidents of the 10 independent republics, and an appointed legislative council, which would be the basis for a new Soviet Union. However, Gorbachev would not be the one to lead it. The coup was not able to rally the support that he needed, and on December 25, 1991, he resigned, and said, "I hereby discontinue my activities at the post of President of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. We're now living in a new world." The next day, the Soviet Union officially broke up, ending the domination of the Communist Party. Yeltsin became president of a Russian federation known as the Union of Soviet Sovereign Republics. His first actions were to eliminate state subsidies on most goods and services, which caused prices to rise, and initiated a program to privatize thousands of large and medium-sized state-owned businesses. The Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty, START-I, had been signed July 31, 1991, in Moscow, by Gorbachev and President Bush, and it was to reduce the amount of strategic offensive arms by about 30%, in 3 phases, over the next 7 years. It was approved by the Senate on October 1, 1992, and the Russian Supreme Soviet on November 4, 1992, but because of the negotiations with the 4 former Soviet republics, which are now independent, the transfer of all nuclear weapons to the Russian Republic had not been completed. The republics of Belarus and Kazakhstan have each ratified START, and have acceded to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty as non-nuclear nations, but not the Ukraine, which was still negotiating with Russia to transfer their weapons. Meanwhile, on January 3, 1993, President Bush and Boris Yeltsin signed START-II, which became the biggest disarmament pact in history. It called for both sides to reduce their long-range nuclear arsenals to about a third of their current levels within 10 years, and totally eliminating all land-based multiple warhead missiles. It was intended to eliminate those weapons that would be used in a first strike situation. President Clinton and Yeltsin signed the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, CTB, in 1996, with some other nations, which banned the testing of nuclear weapons. The U.S. Senate refused to ratify this treaty in 1999. In 2001, Russian President Putin and President George W. Bush discussed the possibility of limiting the number of warheads to about 1/3 of what was called for in START-II, and it was signed in May 2002. Elena Bonner, the widow of Sakharov, said, "The point is that the communist goal is fixed and changeless. It never varies one iota from their objective of world domination. But if we judge them only by the direction in which they seem to be going, we shall be deceived." Former NATO Supreme Allied Commander Bernard W. Rogers said, "The Soviet goal remains world domination." In 1981, Anatoly Golitsyn, a former major in the KGB, who defected to the West, wrote a book called New Lies for Old: The Communist Strategy of Deception and Disinformation, which was published in 1984. He outlined virtually everything that had taken place in Russia, such as the tearing down of the Berlin Wall and the reunification of East and West Germany, the partial relinquishing of their control of Eastern Europe, and the declaration that communism is dead. He wrote that their plan was to deceive the West into believing that the Soviet Union was falling apart, their satellites splintering, and its economy in shambles. The facade of weakness and instability would be part of a massive deception staged by the Kremlin to extort aid from the West, and to get the United States to withdraw troops out of Western Europe. It was Lenin who said, "We advance through retreat." He also said, "When we are weak, boast of strength. When we are strong, feign weakness." At various times during the history of the Soviet Union, they have appealed to the US for help, and have gotten it, mostly through deception, and the efforts of apologists and traitors in our government. But this is the first time that Russia has made this kind of concession. They have made it appear that communism is dead, that democracy is sweeping the former Soviet Union and its satellite countries, and that they want to be part of the new family of nations known as the New World Order. But, with their record, can they be trusted? If you consider all the evidence that was put forth, it just seems to be another ploy by the Soviets to undermine America. A respected Sovietologist has stated his belief that the motive behind the Russians' actions, and their plea for financial aid, is not so much need, but an attempt to destroy the US economy by defaulting on an international loan that could be as much as $100 billion, which could precipitate a financial collapse. Yeltsin ended up addressing a joint session of Congress to appeal for economic aid. The Bush administration shut down Clark Air Force Base in the Philippines, and announced in September 1991 that it was also closing the Subic Bay Naval Base, and would completely withdraw from the island. They have also pulled out of, and are closing 79 military bases in Western Europe, and have withdrawn US nuclear missiles, tanks, planes, and troops. The US also announced the withdrawal of troops from South Korea. In September 1993, Congress approved the recommendation of the Base Closure and Realignment Commission to close 130 domestic military bases, and scale down 45 others. Between 1990 and 1992, the total number of military personnel has decreased by over 8%, and the trend to scale down our military was continuing. The US is virtually shutting down our tank, submarine, only producing one a year, compared to one every 6 weeks for the Russians, and F-16 production lines. On June 7, 1991, the House of Representatives voted to discontinue U.S. bomber production. The House also voted to slash production of submarine-launched ballistic missiles, SLBMs, to coincide with the decrease of our submarine fleet, even though the Soviets have consistently outproduced us. Our government had set a goal of spending only 3.6% of GNP on defense by 1996. Lenin said, "They disarm, we build." Nikita Khrushchev said in a January 14, 1969 speech to the Supreme Soviet, "The Soviets intend to conceal vast reserves of missiles and warheads, hiding them in places throughout the expansive Soviet Union where the imperialists could not spot them. Later, they could be launched in a nuclear war." An official in the Soviet Council of Ministers said in 1987, "Perestroika is expressly designed to enhance Soviet military capability and combat readiness." With military actions in Bosnia and Kosovo and Yugoslavia, Afghanistan, and now Iraq, our military has become stretched around the world, and it has become preoccupied domestically with the war on terrorism. Bush's growing interaction with Putin seems to indicate that our government has continued to fall for the massive deception being put forth by the Russian Federation, and continues to make our country vulnerable, while it looks for ways to continue dismantling our military in the name of creating a leaner, meaner, more modern fighting force. Meanwhile, the Soviets are watching, and waiting, preparing to implement the next stage of their master